In the heart of the great African village of Ntok, life moved with the rhythm of nature. The village sat between two mighty rivers, their waters flowing like silver veins through the land, feeding the crops and quenching the thirst of the people. Majestic green trees surrounded Ntok, their branches stretching toward the heavens, providing shade and shelter. It was a peaceful place, where the people lived off the land and shared in each other's joys and sorrows. But over this peaceful village loomed the shadow of a wicked king, Uche, who ruled from his grand palace on the hill. King Uche had a reputation for cruelty. He was a man who believed in power, wealth, and status. The villagers feared him, for his punishments were swift and harsh. He demanded high taxes, taking the best of their harvests and keeping the people poor. Yet, there was one glimmer of hope in Ntok, the king's only son, Prince John. Unlike his father, John was loved by all. He was kind, humble, and always walked among the people, listening to their stories, helping where he could. John had grown up in the palace, surrounded by wealth and luxury, but he found no joy in these things. His happiness came from the village, from the laughter of children, from the songs of the elders, and from the beauty of the land that surrounded them. The palace walls felt like a cage, and he often escaped to the rivers and forests, seeking peace in nature and the company of the villagers. One day, while walking by the river, John met a young woman named Jessica. She was the daughter of Okeke, a poor fisherman who lived in a small hut near the water's edge. Jessica was different from the noblewomen John had been introduced to in the palace. She was simple, but there was a light in her eyes and a kindness in her heart that drew John to her. She was beautiful, with dark skin that glowed under the sun and long, braided hair that fell down her back. She was strong too, always working alongside her father, mending nets and gathering fish. They began to spend more time together. Each day, John would walk to the river under the guise of exploring the village, but his true purpose was to see Jessica. They talked for hours, sharing their hopes and dreams. John told her about the palace life that he found suffocating, while Jessica spoke of the simple joys of her life by the river, her love for her father, and the beauty of the world around them. It wasn't long before John realized that he loved her. She was everything he had ever wanted, pure, kind, and full of life. But there was one great obstacle in their path: King Uche. When John finally worked up the courage to tell his father about Jessica, the king's response was swift and filled with anger. "A prince of Ntok will not marry a commoner," Uche roared, his voice echoing through the palace halls. "You are to marry someone of status, of wealth. How can you bring a poor fisherman's daughter into this family?" John stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. "Father, I do not care about wealth or status. Jessica is a good woman. She is kind and strong. I love her, and I wish to marry her." But Uche would not hear it. "You are a fool," he shouted. "You will marry someone worthy of our name, or you will not marry at all." The king's refusal was like a knife to John's heart, but worse still was the punishment he laid upon Jessica and her family. King Uche sent word to the village that no one in Okeke's household was to have any contact with the prince. If they disobeyed, they would be banished from the village, or worse. Okeke, knowing the king's cruelty, urged Jessica to stay away from John. "My daughter," Okeke said one evening as they sat by the river, "I know your heart aches, but the king is powerful. He will destroy us if you continue to see Prince John. We cannot fight him." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes, but she nodded, for she loved her father and did not want to bring harm upon him. "I will stay away," she whispered, though the words broke her heart. For weeks, John wandered the village alone, his heart heavy with sorrow. He tried to forget Jessica, but he could not. Everywhere he looked, he saw her, her smile, her laugh, the way her hands moved so gracefully as she worked. His love for her grew stronger with each passing day, and he knew that he could not live without her. One night, when the moon was full and the village was quiet, John made a decision. He would not let his father dictate his heart. He sneaked out of the palace and made his way to the river, where he knew Jessica would be. She was sitting by the water, her face lit by the soft glow of the moon, and when she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "John," she whispered, "we cannot keep doing this. Your father will punish us." But John took her hands in his voice steady and sure. "I cannot live without you, Jessica. I don't care what my father says. I love you, and I will marry you, no matter the cost." They stood together by the river, the sound of the water rushing past them, and made a vow to each other. They would find a way to be together, no matter what. The next morning, John stood before his father once more. "I will marry Jessica," he declared, his voice strong. "If you will not allow it, then I will leave this palace and live as a common man. I will not marry anyone else." King Uche, furious, threatened to disown John, to take away his title, his wealth, and his inheritance. But none of these threats moved the prince. "I do not care about riches," John said. "I care about love, and if I cannot marry Jessica, I will have nothing to do with this kingdom." Word of the prince's defiance spread through the village, and soon, the people of Ntok began to gather outside the palace gates. They had suffered under King Uche's rule for too long, and now they saw hope in John's love for Jessica. The villagers, young and old, began to chant, "Let them marry! Let them marry!" Their voices grew louder, rising like a storm, until even the king could not ignore them. Faced with the overwhelming will of the people and the determination of his own son, King Uche was forced to relent. His pride was wounded, but he knew that if he did not give in, he might lose not only his son, but the loyalty of the entire village. And so, on a bright and beautiful day, with the rivers sparkling and the trees swaying gently in the wind, Prince John and Jessica were married. The village celebrated with joy unlike any they had known. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of flowers. Okeke, the humble fisherman, wept as he watched his daughter marry the prince, his heart full of pride and gratitude. As for King Uche, he watched from a distance, his heart heavy with regret. In his quest for control and power, he had almost destroyed the one thing that truly mattered, the happiness of his son. Though he remained king, it was clear to all that John and Jessica were the true rulers of the people's hearts. From that day on, Ntok became a place where love, not wealth or status, was valued most. The rivers flowed with greater beauty, the trees stood taller, and the people of the village lived in harmony, knowing that love had triumphed over cruelty. And as for John and Jessica, they lived happily, their love growing stronger with each passing day. A reminder to all that true happiness comes from the heart, not from riches or power.